You've had your first child or you have small children in the home. The problem is you have no idea what to do as a parent. Join me as I interview my friend Larry Hagner, leader of the Dad.Edge podcast and author of his newest book, The Spirit of Fatherhood, as we unpack what it looks like to be a dad. You'll walk away from this episode with some great practical boots on the ground tools with how to father in the stress bubble of life. Guys, I want to introduce to you my friend Larry Hagner. This is his second time on our show. In 2015, Larry started the Dad.Edge podcast to learn parenting skills from experts and to live a legendary life as a husband, father, and a man. The Dad.Edge podcast has been the #1 dad podcast for 5 years running with over 30 million downloads to date. Larry has interviewed over 1,000 experts on various topics related to manhood. He is also the author of several books, including his newest book, The Spirit of Fatherhood, which is our subject for today. Hey, I'm super excited to have my friend Larry Hagner on. As you guys know, Larry, this is his second time on the show, and he's just an awesome guy. God is doing some cool things in his life. And Larry, it's just great to have you on the show again, brother.
What's going on? It is so good to be here, man. I'm excited. I feel very blessed to be here, brother.
I'll tell you what, it is so cool to see what is going on with the Dad.Edge. I mean, 30 million downloads, 1,000 interviews with experts. I mean, you've had some high-level guys on. You just wrote a book that we're going to talk about today, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Life is good. Life doesn't come without challenges either, but I'm excited, man.
And now your biceps are looking a little bigger than last time, huh? Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
Oh, we can talk about that, man. Fitness took a very big back seat. I got a very nice, warm slice of humble pie when I started actually writing this book that actually put my fitness way on the back burner.
Oh,
And
really? Okay.
oh yeah, it was actually a big part of I think some spiritual warfare that was going on. Like I got injured and it was serious. And quite frankly, I didn't think my life was ever going to be the same. Luckily, I am about 7 months past that injury, and I would say I'm about 90% back to what I was doing functionally before all this.
Well, it must have been your left arm because your right arm's got some good deltoid separation and your bis and tris looking good. Was it your left arm?
No, it was my right knee actually.
Oh, your knee. Well, hey, let's
Yeah.
talk about this. So you wrote the book, The Spirit of Fatherhood, and so you said there was a journey just now, and you had spiritual warfare. Can you talk to us about this journey? Because book writing, man, it definitely isn't a journey. So tell me about your journey through the book.
Oh boy. So okay, well I'll start from the beginning. You want to hear? So this is where I
Yeah.
think I think, God has a greater plan for all of us, right? And our plan doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be, the thing that we want. So let's just go back really quickly to September of 2022. What a lot of people don't know is I actually currently, as you and I are talking, I have two unpublished, totally finished books. One is the one we're talking about today, which is Spirit of Fatherhood, coming out. Pre-orders available on May 28th, and then really released on Father's Day this year. But that's not how this book even came about. This book actually came about because in 2022, I wrote another book called The Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. That was my fourth book at the time. It is now going to be my fifth book that will probably launch in 2025. But it was like the big book, right? 250 pages, four different parts. It covered everything, leadership, and it covered parenting. It covered, raising daughters, raising sons, marriage, communication, intimacy, psychological safety, all these things that basically we have encapsulated in the past 10 years, put it into one book. And I went with I was like, I've self-published every book. I think I'm going to go with the publisher this time. Went with the publisher, and that book was supposed to be launched in September of 2022. Now, 6 weeks prior to that, I get this email from the CEO. Hey, bad news. We're going bankrupt. And I'm like, what?
Oh
Right.
no.
I was like, and it's like, I get on the phone with the CEO. I'm like, hey man, what the heck's going on? He's like, yeah. He's like, he gave me the story of what happened. And basically, uh, long story, they weren't getting credit for a lot of the royalties, and it really put him in a bad financial spot. So he's like, listen, we can't launch. He goes, we can still launch your book. He goes, I'll help you self-publish it if you want. He's like, or I'll just sign over the rights to you. I was like, you know what? I'm not in a mad rush to get this thing out. I'll just sign the rights back over to me. Hired an agent. And I was like, got together with this lady and I'm like, hey, here's the book. She's like, I love it. I want to take you as a client. I'm like, okay, great. Now this woman had been in the business for 25 years. She's worked for HarperCollins. So for her to say, I love this book, I'm like, sweet. Okay. So we got a shot here. So she started shopping publishers and we had meetings with some. I just really couldn't get the book deal that I wanted. And then finally, Morehouse Publishing called a meeting with us, and they're like, "Hey, we have something unexpected for you, and here it is." And they were like, "We love your book. We want to publish the book, but we want you to write another one first." And I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, we want you to write a book. We already have the title. It's called Spirit of Fatherhood." And I'm like, "Okay." I was like, "What's this book about?" And they're like, we want you to write a Christian-based view approach to fatherhood. And I laughed, Jim. I laughed. I was like, are you sure you got the right guy? Like, that's not me. And they're like, no, no, we've been watching you. We know that you're new to your faith. You've only been pretty much really involved with your faith and a relationship with God for the past 3 years or so. And we've really been watching you closely. And that's why we think you're the guy to write this. I'm like, well, why? And they're like, well, we think you can write this book the same way you podcast, which is you don't ever preach from the pulpit. You talk about all the, we think the joke that you make all the time, you can never run for public office because all your dirty laundry's out there, is so relatable. And we love the fact that you can relate to guys. And we think you can write this book from a relationship standpoint
For sure.
versus like preaching from a pulpit. I was like, that I can do.
Yep.
I can do that.
Yep.
So yeah, so I inked that contract. And I was like, okay. I was like, so when do y'all need the book by? And they're like, well, we want to release it on Father's Day. I'm like, awesome. So I got like 6 months, and they're like, no, you have 11 weeks. And I'm like, what? 11 weeks? I was like, it took me almost a year to write Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. They're like, yeah, we need it in 11 weeks. And I'm like, oh my dear goodness gracious. So I was like, okay, well, and this is where I was really like, all right, God, and like, what do you want me to do? And I kept just getting the nudge, just say yes, just do it. We'll handle it. We'll do it. We'll do it. I'm like, okay. And so I did that. And I'm like, okay. So I have 11 weeks. And I sat in front of my computer, Jim. And I was like, I almost called the publisher back. And I'm like, I can't do it. Can't do it. Nope. I didn't do that though. Instead, that very same week, I was in the gym with my oldest son, felt a twinge in my knee. And fitness has always been a huge part of my life. And if I'm
Yeah.
being really honest, a huge even part of my identity,
Oh,
right? And
wow.
which is kind of dangerous,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I got injured, and I got injured so bad. And I'll give you the broad stroke here. I didn't know it until 7 weeks into this injury, but my knee was actually hemorrhaging internally in the joint. I had no idea that I thought it was swollen. I was bleeding internally in my knee. And I didn't know it until 7 weeks into this. And all I know is I couldn't walk. I was hobbling around. I was like, sooner or later, this inflammation's got to go away. I'm icing it. I'm taking ibuprofen. Finally, after 7 weeks, I went to go get it checked out. This orthopedic surgeon's like, that ain't right. And I had an MRI done. I had no tears. So I didn't know what was going on. So he drains it, and like two turkey basters full of blood comes out of my knee. And I'm just like, and I've been in medical device sales, and I looked at it. I was like, is that blood? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, why am I bleeding? He's like, I don't know, man. He goes, you don't have any tears on the MRI. This isn't good. We need to start running tests for like bone cancer and blood disorders. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And that just spun me up, man. Like, but I will tell you, it humbled me. It pruned me. It put me in that seat. And I'll tell you, I was just, there was a lot of other things going on, like in my life with my family, even within the Dad.Edge organization. We were hit with some challenges with our leadership team. And every single turn was a different challenge. And I knew it was spiritual warfare. But here's what I kept saying as I wrote that book. There were times, man, where I was writing chapters, and I was writing it in a Starbucks, and I literally just, tears were streaming down my face as I'm pouring this stuff out because it was hard to write it. And but I kept hearing and I kept getting this feeling, just keep moving forward. And here's the other thing too. I think it's there's a part of us that fear, like, if I talk about my faith and my Christianity, will I be ousted or whatever? Like, will people turn their backs on me? Will they welcome me more with open arms? What is it going to be like? And I kept also feeling this feeling of like, if this book costs me everything, then so be it. So be it. I don't, well, I can say, I can't say I don't know where that strength came from because it came from God, but it was tumultuous. I'm happy to give you more detail of things that were going on in my head. But that's, I really wrote this book from probably the most raw and most authentic place that I was at.
Well, it's funny. You were on the podcast about 2 years ago. It might have been even longer than that, maybe 2 years ago. And I remember you had shared that you were a Christian. You're a pretty new Christian. I thought, man, that's rad because you've got a whole space out there. You're reaching guys that aren't guys of faith. And when I read this book, I finished it about 3 days ago. I was from an older guy to a younger guy. I was like so proud of you, man. I'm like, Larry, man, get some. I mean, you were. I mean, I'm like, I called my digital creative marketing gal. I said, he's all in here. This book is a Christian book. I mean, I was shocked. I was proud. I was excited. And I think it's really cool what God is doing in your life. But I also think what's cool is that, yeah, we might be canceled, we might be this, but when God puts his hand on it, it's exponential. So, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I think you got some cool things going. And so you experienced a lot of spiritual warfare through those 11 weeks.
I did.
How are you doing now?
So it's, here's the crazy thing. When that book was done, so I had surgery on my knee November 20th, and the book was completed on November 5th last year. I actually got the book done 9 days before deadline, which was shocking to me. And I got surgery, and then my doc told me, he's like, "Hey, we found the problem. You ruptured, like, so it wasn't as bad." Basically, the doctor would tell me, "I don't know what's going on until I get in there." And this doc was finally like, "Hey, we got in there." He's like, "I thought I'd be in there for 30 minutes. I was in there for an hour and a half. We found the problem. You ruptured a membrane. It just kept bleeding and bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. So we just stopped the bleeding. We removed it." He's like, "So the good news is you'll be good. Bad news is your road to recovery is gonna be a lot longer than what we thought. Like, we thought, maybe within 6 weeks. You're looking at more like 4 months
Whoa.
before you're feeling somewhat normal." And he was right. It was like right at the 4 months. So, but I'm feeling a lot better now.
So it wasn't a bursa sac, it was some membrane.
The synovial membrane ruptured,
The synovial
and
membrane. Wow.
yeah,
Wow. And that is
yeah,
what gets the fluid going.
it is. That's what gets the fluid going, and that's what bleeds if it ruptures
Wow.
a lot.
Wow. I'm glad
But
to, wow.
here's the thing, man. Like, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I dealt with this thing for 4 months, and I was literally like, I mean, I was reading scary things online. I mean, I even put a story about it in the book, where I was one night just a wreck because I was reading other people on Google. They just having the same problem I did, and they couldn't get it stopped bleeding, and they had to have their leg amputated from the knee down. And I'm sitting there like, what is my life going to look like after this? This is really horrific. But I think it took me to that place where I had nothing but God.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's the way it was supposed to go down. You know, I wasn't supposed to write it because, like, I'll be very honest, man. When I inked the contract of that book, I was in the best shape I've ever been in for like 2 straight years, and I'm
Uh-huh.
48. And to have that stripped away, and for that to be like, I had to find other things that were more therapeutic and reassuring for me. And I dove even more into scripture than I ever have been, even writing that book.
Isn't that crazy? Our identity as men, we seem to default back to our work, our hobbies, and I think God as our identity is not our default. Is that what you
Right.
experienced?
I did. I thought it was even right.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I have a great relationship with God now. I'm a Christian. I talk about Christianity with my kids. I talk about scripture. We openly talk about prayer. But like, I'll tell you, man, like, God will teach you lessons. And through writing that book, I didn't have as deep of a relationship with him as I thought I did. Like, because I was at a peak, right? I was doing really well. And it's easy to say you've got a relationship with Christ when things are going really good. It's when you're in the pit and you're really leaning on your faith, and you're really leaning on the fact that like for some reason this is supposed to happen right now, even though I don't want it to. And it really helped me like, how do I find the good right now? How do I find, the peace in this right now? So it was a challenge, but it was a good challenge to go through.
It's funny how God uses suffering to draw us closer than him. It seems like it's the place he meets us in. Like he meets us in
Yes.
that synovial rupture. Like he
Right.
meets us. He's like, "Hey, I'm here."
Yeah.
Really interesting. Well, that's cool. You said something throughout this journey that I think is really cool, and I think this is what sets you apart from others. You said that God said to you, "Just say yes, just do it, just keep moving forward." And it just seems to me that those phrases are the key to Christianity. I mean, if you want to know what God wants you to do, I would quote Larry Hagner: just say yes, just do it, just keep moving. Any more thoughts on that?
Yeah. Because I really got in, I obviously I'm deep into scripture, and especially like, I love The Chosen.
Oh, me
I,
too.
I, I
Love it.
yeah, I do. And, I've been watching The Chosen religiously ever since it came out. And I was watching season 3, during this process as well. And here's the interesting thing about, just say yes, just keep moving forward. You know, if I go back to like my childhood, and, because I went to a Catholic school growing up, and I knew about the Bible, and I knew about God, and I knew Jesus and the disciples and all this. But I always just had this picture that the disciples were just like, "Oh, we are fully confident. We know exactly what's going on, and this is good." They. But if you really watch The Chosen, and if you read the scripture, they did not know what was going on. Like they were like, "Okay, we feel really good that this guy is the Messiah. He is who he says he is." But there was also like, "Oh my gosh, this is hard. This is not easy." And a lot of them were just like, what's going to happen next? Like, there's such a humanity in that show. And even if you peel back the layers when you're reading scripture, that the disciples are even like, I don't know what's going on. This is dangerous. This is scary. It's uncertain. I have to leave everything behind, but I just need to say yes to it. And they did. And I think that if we could have an ear like that, of like, just say yes to it. I got you. Everything will be it might not be okay, but you will be taken care of.
I love the scene where Jesus calls Matthew out of the tax booth, and Peter says,
Yes.
"You can't call him.
Yeah.
You can't." He goes, "What? Why?" He goes, "Well, he's different." And Jesus looked at Peter and goes, "Get used to
Get
different."
used to different.
I'm dying waiting for season 4, so
Me too.
I can't wait to see it. Well, hey, so what? So when you wrote the Spirit of Fatherhood, you were given the title, but as you dove headlong into this thing in the midst of the journey, what's your goal for readers? And I will say this: you do have kind of a very grassroots, "Hey guys, we're in this together" thing. So it's you bring people along in your journey, which I like. I love that style. It's very down to earth. It's really it'll be a real great book for guys to read because you do share all the laundry. So what's your goal in the book?
My goal in the book is written from a place of like, hey, I didn't really understand this before either. And I just
Yeah,
started learning myself. And here's some things that I've learned. And hey, come with me as we go learn this all together, versus like, I'm up here, you're down here. So I think that's the premise of how the book is written. But it's really, I started, remembering like, when I started getting nudges, of like, hey, I really need to start understanding this better if I'm going to be the spiritual leader in my home. And here's how it showed up for me. I have an 18-year-old. He's my oldest, 16, 10, and 8. And it really started to happen when my oldest was right around 13. It's like 5 years ago, right before I started really getting involved with my faith. He started asking me questions I didn't know the answer to. And that's when I'm like, he's like, he would ask me quite, we'd go to church, we'd go to church every Sunday. We always have. And he'd be like, what did that mean? And I'm like, I, I really don't know. He's like, well, you know, he would ask me about the apostles. Well, where did John come from? Like, what's his story? And like, what does John 3:16 mean? And I'm like, how do I put this into words? Like, I haven't been asked this. Like, I haven't even explored this myself. So this book is written from a father to make to help you make a relationship with God and help you intertwine that into your journey, and make it less intimidating, right? So I really pulled like some of the scriptures and some of the experiences, just so it's so much easier for a man to digest, and it's not so intimidating for a lot of guys. Because I've heard that now that I've been in study for 4 years, that the Bible's so intimidating. I don't even know where to start. I'm like, well, what would it look like if you were to put lenses on where you could view some of these things in a very simple way through the lens of fatherhood, through the lens of Christianity, and you could build a relationship with God in that way. The other way too is this, you know, and I really thought about this aspect of it. This book is not just about like fathering your kids through a Christian based lens, because quite frankly, like I think we get that, but here's where I think men really want to understand more. What is my relationship with God? Like how do I, before I teach it or guide my kids to that, what does that look like for me? I don't really even understand that. This book will help you explore that. And it'll help you, I think, have a greater understanding of the God that we have. And I'll give you an example. And I talk about this in the book. I used to always like I was a box checker when it came to my faith. Like, oh, we went to church. Yes, we tithed. Yes, we prayed before dinner. Yes, we prayed before we went to. But I didn't have this relationship with God. I didn't know how to form it. I didn't know where to start. And here's the biggest thing. And this is I wrote about this in the book. I did not feel worthy to have a relationship with God. I'm like, I'm a sinner. I've done really bad things. I will continue to probably do bad things. I will make mistakes. Why even formulate this relationship with God? Because in a way that the way that I felt it was, it's really intimidating. I'm not worthy. I'm going to continue to screw up. So why try? Like that was actually like I say that now, and I think how foolish that was, because a tremendous spiritual mentor of mine said, Larry, what would you say if one of your kids came up to you and said, Dad, like, look, I'm not worthy of your love, and I'm not worthy of your forgiveness, and I'm not even really worthy to be around you. Like I am a tainted, I make mistakes. I'm a troubled young man that just, I'm just trying to figure this out. Like, he's like, what would you say to them? I was like, are you kidding me? I would never want my kid to feel that way. Like, I would be like, I would sit him down and be like, dude, no. No, there's nothing that you can't do that I won't forgive you. There's nothing that you could do that's so bad that you can't come home. There's nothing. And he looked at me, he goes, do you think God feels any different? In fact, take that feeling and times it by 1,000,000. And that's what your heavenly father feels about you. And I was like, really? And he's like, yes. He wants you to come to him the same way you want your kids to come to you. And I don't know what it was about hearing that in that simplest form, but I was like, oh my gosh, like that makes total sense to me. So suddenly that unworthiness just felt like it just dissipated just a little bit. Is it still there? A little bit. Of course it is, but it dissipates. And it's like, hey, like I'm here, and in all my quote unquote the unworthiness that I feel, and all the unforgiveness that I feel like I don't deserve, or the forgiveness I feel like I don't deserve. And but God doesn't want that relationship with us. He wants us to come home just as we want our kids to come home.
Hmm. I just was reminded of Matthew 11, where God says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you
Give you rest.
rest." And that's
Yeah.
good, man. Well, you and I have something in common in the fact that we both focus on men living in this stress bubble of life called fathering, right? And, you talked about being intimidated by the word of God. I think fathering is intimidating. I remember when I first held my son for the first time. My middle son is getting ready to have his first son in about 2 months. In your book, you wrote this, and I want to just ask you about this quote. You said, "Fatherhood is a new dawn of responsibilities, pains, and joys." You continue, "Along with it comes great responsibility and power, as well as a tremendous amount of fear." So there's that intimidation, right? So what are some great, when you think of these, as you work with men and you talk about uh, fathering, what are some of these great responsibilities that men might be intimidated by?
I think anytime that you're responsible for another human being, leading them, raising them, trying to teach them life lessons, that is a tremendous feeling of overwhelm, right? It's exciting, but it's also like, and it goes back to that unworthiness, right? Because we all have our own scars, we all have our own traumas, our own mistakes, and the things that we've done, and we have a really hard time letting those things go. So if you really like, let's pull back all the onion layers of what a guy feels like, right? And what he feels like is, man, this is really exciting. I love being a dad, but who am I to raise this kid? Like, I barely know what I'm doing, right? More or less, I got to teach somebody else and raise somebody else. Like, this is terrifying. And here's the thing, we don't say that kind of stuff out loud
For sure.
as men, right?
Yeah.
Fine, good, busy.
Yeah.
Three,
Yeah.
three, three favorite words,
Yep.
right? But you peel back all those onion layers, like what you hear is, this is hard and it's scary to me, if I'm being really honest.
Well, it's scary too because we're growing up in a generation, an age when a lot of these guys that are becoming parents don't have a dad in the picture. So they don't even have any kind of model except for an absent dad or a dad who was gone or emotionally checked out. They have no model. So
Right.
where do they go to find that out? I mean, they're having kids and they have no idea, and that is incredibly intimidating. And then we throw into it these two. We add one more word into this leadership. We add the word spiritual, and then it just creates a whole storm of stuff because the guy's going, I don't even know how to lead, period, let alone you're saying spiritual leader. What have you
Yeah.
learned? You're a 3-year-old Christian, you're leading a large men's movement. What are you learning about spiritual leadership?
So I'm like a toddler, right? I'm out of my terrible twos a little bit. I'm on to the crazy threes or whatever it
I
is.
don't know.
But
I think when
yeah,
man grows a man spiritually, it's like dog years. So you're like
yeah,
22.
yeah. You know, so I think you have to lead with humility, number one. So like, I don't know all the answers when my kids ask me questions about scripture, but here's what I say. Let's go ask the pastor, or let's go research it, or let's open up the Bible and let's see what it says about that. I don't know. Like, I'll tell my kids, I'm like, I know a thing or two because of what I've learned in the past, 4 years, 3, 4 years. But I by no means am I an expert. I'm still exploring. I'm still on this journey. Like, let's go learn together. I think that there's two types of journeys that students or like people go on, right? They go on a journey with someone who is like a guru, right? And they learn from that person. They also go on journeys with people like, I really don't know, but let's figure it out together. You know what I mean? So like, I'll never forget, I did martial arts for 10 years of my life. And the last style that I did, I had this instructor he was very hard. Every belt that we tested he called it a rite of passage and an experience. It was not a test, rite of passage and experience. I used to loathe like these belt tests. Like my yellow belt test, my first test was 8 hours long. And it was a beat down. And every belt after that was the same way. So, but he always touted one thing. When you get your black belt, that's when you start to learn. And he was a second degree. And he's like, I'm a second degree, which basically kind of makes me a second grader in this whole thing. Yes, I've done this for 7 years, 8 years, but I'm still learning. And that's actually, he was very hardcore and he knew a thing or two, but he also was a teacher that was like, hey, come along because I'm still learning myself. My goal is to be a ninth degree master, and it's going to take me a really long time to get there. And I am still learning. And I loved that aspect of his teaching. And I think that that is the way that we can lead our kids. Is like, let's all just learn this together. I'm going to guide you, and I can definitely teach you a few things, but like, let's also learn together.
That's really good. Well, one of the things that came out in chapter 2, you talk about a father's spiritual growth, and you're sharing your journey, and you're sharing as your sporadic attendance became regular attendance, and your Bible reading became this, and you're sharing a lot of your stuff. And I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between guys. And you had a quote that I just might be my favorite quote in the book, And it said this, and just you talk about values, and you coin them different, use different words to describe the same thing. But let me read this. It's an excellent quote. You said, "From the beginning, it's important to reflect on your values, and as a Christian father, identifying your core beliefs is paramount. Ask yourself what principles and virtues do you wish to instill in your children? Understanding and embracing your values will guide you in setting expectations that resonate with your faith." And you kind of alluded back and forth, values, core beliefs, principles, and virtues. But I think the bottom line here is there's something about those things that are different than a guy having an aspiration or a goal or cognitive assent. So when does an aspiration or cognitive assent become an actual value? Like, where was that connection point for you? You know, we often forget, guys, that God has called us to steward the bodies he gave us so that we'll be ready, healthy, and spiritually dangerous to fight the good fight. That's why we're so excited to partner with Mountain Tough Fitness Lab. Join me on my journey by going to mountaintough.com and getting your free 6-week trial when you type in the code ARENA30. You won't be disappointed. Stay dangerous.
It's a great question. You know, my biggest filter, my most important filter is, does whatever decision I'm going to make align with my values, with my core principles, right? If it does, then it's an easy yes. If it doesn't, it's probably going to be a no, right? So I can I'll give you an example of this. So I had a podcast guest on, and I was very nervous to have this guy on because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get some hate on this. His name, have you ever heard of Joshua Broome?
Yeah, he was a porn star. It
Yes,
turned
sir.
pastor. He was on my podcast. It's
Was
all
he?
good. Oh heck yeah.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah. Okay.
awesome. I didn't tell
So,
he had a porn name that I didn't want him to tell anybody.
right. Right.
We don't want to know your porn name. Just talk to us as a pastor.
Exactly. So like I really battled of whether or not to have him on the show. I was like, man, I don't know. Like the hate might be just come out of the woodwork on this one, right? And yeah, right. And then I went to Uncle Joe. Or we call him Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe is your age. He's the guy I do Q&As with on the podcast. And I was like, Uncle Joe, what do you think? And Uncle Joe is very good about not giving you an answer. He'll just ask you questions. And he's like, I can understand why you're concerned about having him on. However, what men out there need to hear a story of self-forgiveness and a story of redemption that, quite frankly, is bigger than whether or not you're going to get a 1-star review on your podcast. And I'm like, yep, okay. So my core values, right? Something that aligns is I would love for men to live with integrity and being able to feel worthy and being able to forgive themselves, because I think that's one of the hardest things that I had a hard time with. So I was like, okay, let me really look into Joshua and what he did. And if you really look at it's, I mean, Joshua reminds me a lot of, Mary Magdalene, right? Or like the forgiveness of her, or like even like, you know, all of every human being would look at somebody like Matthew, if you've watched The Chosen, and you're like, that guy could never be forgiven. He's one of the most hated people from both his own people, the Jews, and the Romans really don't care about him either. They just want him to get the money, right? But he's hated. No one likes him. And then suddenly Jesus calls him forward, calls her forward. And there's this renewal and there's this redemption. And basically the message is no matter what you've done, you can always come home. You can always be forgiven. And sometimes the person that is keeping you from that relationship with your creator is the man that looks at you every day in the mirror saying, I'm just not worthy. So aligning that decision, because I'm like, okay, let's get him on the podcast. Here's the funny thing. I just had him on for a second time this week. So I had him on to talk about his book too. And 7, I'd have to go back. It's 7 lies that we believe in, and they're basically works of the enemy. Like like one of the lies, I'm not worthy, I'm unforgivable, right? Like that's a lie. And so things like that. And I'll tell you, I did not get one piece of hate mail, one bad review. I actually had a pour out from men of like, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this interview. This was gold for me because like I had emails from guys of like stories of things, affairs and all the stuff they were holding on to. And they're like, I thought this was unforgivable, but maybe it isn't, things like that. I'm like, okay, good. I'm glad that was something that moved the kingdom forward, right? But that was an alignment, and it was a battle at first with is this a core value? Is this integrity? Is it compromising that, or is it actually going to move things forward?
Well, it's really interesting. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's aligning who we are with who we want to be. Those things have to align. And by alignment, a value is not something that's spoken. I just got done speaking to some men last night, and I said, a value is done, not spoken. So we can identify a guy's values based on what he does, not what he says. And so what I heard you saying was it's aligning the man we say to we are with the man we are, and the man we want to be with the man we are now. It's like aligning those things and getting them in the same direction. And so that's really good, man. I think that's critical for men as far as being spiritual leaders, to have that alignment that's more than just saying I'm a Christian. One of the things that seems like you do really well with your kids, when I look at your posts and your book, you are really good about forging these unbreakable bonds. And I thought your chapter 3 was very, very strong, because that's something that you just do well, right? It seems to me that you do well, in the midst of being a human and having your own problems and, your issues like we all have. You wrote in chapter 3, you said the key, and I love this because I think that we don't do this enough as parents today. The key to gently nudge them is to gently nudge them into slightly uncomfortable situations. And it seems like we live in a world today with parents who they want to buffer their kids, they want to insulate their children from any kind of pain or suffering. So as you build and some people would say forging an unbreakable bond with a child is doing exactly the opposite of what you just said. It's insulating them. But you say, and I agree with you, that it's actually stretching them and challenging them. Can you walk us through that as a parent?
I think it's one of the hardest things that I actually do is put them in uncomfortable positions. So like what I mean by that is I grew up and there was very little comfort. It was very chaotic growing up. My mom was married 3 times. It was a revolving door of these toxic, alcoholic, drug using, abusive father figures, right? So like my tendency, believe it or not, is actually to overserve and to give comfort because I wanted that so bad growing up. But I also know that's as Dr. Daniel Amen says, by doing that, you actually rob them of their confidence and self-esteem. Self-esteem and confidence is built from, being in an uncomfortable spot and navigating your way through and be like, oh wow, I just did that, right? Now there are times where I catch myself over serving and I do it, right? But there are also a lot of times where I purposely put in things that are hard for my kids to do, right? My kids will like, listen, I screw up a lot as a dad. I screw up a lot as a husband, but here's where I can tell you there's only one or two, three things that I could be like, you know what? I'm actually pretty good at that. And one of them is creating an environment of psychological safety, conversational excellence where my kids will tell me really, really hard things they don't want to say out loud. But I've done that day after day, rep after rep, of having conversations with them and being able to respond and ask them questions versus blast them with a lecture with shame, blame, pain, and guilt. Right. So that's how I operate with them. By no means do they have the easy road. My kids will tell you, they're like, gosh, like we feel very loved. We feel very safe, but it ain't easy around here. Like you're strict. I'm like, yeah, but here's what I'll tell you. So, um, I'll give you an example. And this goes, this is, I think I might've used it. I did. I wrote about this in the book. So my son and I, my oldest, we went to go see the season finale of season 3 of The Chosen this time last year in the theaters. I love to take my kids out on one-on-one dates. I think it's a great bonding experience, but also a really great way to open them up and talk about things they otherwise wouldn't. So we went and saw that movie, we went and had dinner. We're sitting face to face. And I told him, I said, and we're having a great night. And I looked at him and I said, hey, Ethan, I said, I'm going to ask you a question. And they know like I'm like the master of questions. I always ask them quick questions. I said, I'm going to ask you a question. I was like, it's going to put you on the spot. And you're probably going to think that I have an agenda or I'm trying to trap you into giving me an answer. I was like, I have no agenda and I have no idea what you're going to tell me. But we don't really get to talk like this that often. So here's the question. Is there something you want to share with me that you think I might not understand or something you've been holding back? And this is the situation that he shared with me. I could have easily have thrown the golden parachute and just saved him, right? But I didn't. And here's what but otherwise it doesn't build his confidence. So right away he's like, kind of like looks off to the side, takes a deep breath. I'm like, ooh, something's coming right now. Me as a dad, he has to have this experience with me because here's the way I view it. And I think all dads really need to hear this. How you respond when your kid gets super vulnerable is how he is a testament to whether or not he's ever going to share anything deep with you again. Yeah. So any opportunity where your kid is about ready to share something with you and how you respond will dictate whether or not they're going to tell you something tough, deep, authentic, raw, wrong, dishonest, anything in the future. So, so here's what he did. He goes, and I knew something was coming up. And in my head and in my heart, I'm like, get ready, something's coming. So he's like, yeah. He goes, so I have two F's in school right now, and he was a sophomore at the time, and he does okay in school. He's not a straight A student, but he doesn't get F's. And I was like, mm, two F's. And I was like, what? And then he goes, I have seven missing assignments right now. And immediately I just want to be like, what do you mean you have seven missing assignments? What do you mean you have two F's? We don't get F's. You do your homework. You like, I just want to blast him because like I saw like he'd been on his phone and he'd been wasting time and he was procrastinating and I just want to blast him. But instead, the response, like I do this for myself actually. And I always have a response of, ooh, that took some courage to tell me, huh? Now, inside, I might be boiling a little bit, but that's not what he needs. I invited him in, and I was like, "Thanks for telling me that. That took some courage for telling me that. What? Tell me more. What's going on?" Now, I use those words, "Tell me more," not why. Tell me more is like I'm inviting you into this conversation. Tell me more is this. Why do you have two F's? Is this right? And that's only going to shut him down. So I said, "Tell me what's going on." He said, Dad, and it was legit. He's like, Dad, you remember when I was sick like 3 weeks ago? And he was out of school for like 4 days. It's like, remember when I was out of school for 4 days, about 3 weeks ago? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, Dad, like I missed 4 days of school, which really set me behind. I had all these missing assignments. I'd get done with three of them. I'd get three more. I get done with three more. I'd get four more. I'd get done with five of them, get close. And then all of a sudden, boom, I have four more. He's like, I feel like I am on this treadmill and I cannot catch up, like no matter what I do. And he was very frustrated. And there was a part of me that immediately just wanted to be like, all right, here's the plan. Here's what we're going to do. But I didn't. And this is where it's uncomfortable. Here's the thing, the discomfort isn't just with my kids, it's actually with me too, because I feel more comfortable if I am helping you solve your problem and relieve your pain. That brings me comfort, but that's also somewhat selfish. So instead, I was like, okay, I was like, tell me something. I go, I remember last semester, because this was the second semester, you had COVID and you were out for 5 days. And the story I'm telling myself is you were in the same situation. You had several missing assignments. And all of a sudden he was like, I did. And I was like, well, how did you get through that? And immediately he was just like, well, he goes, I got up 30 minutes early for school and I tried to like work on something for 30 minutes. I did stay up later. I would give you my phone and then I go do my work. He's like, but the real work came because they get an hour for lunch. When I was able to go into the auditorium, I had to eat lunch away from my friends. I grabbed my lunch, I put in my AirPods, and I just for one straight hour, I would just hammer out as much as I could. And that took about 3 or 4 days of doing that. He's like, but then I caught up and I just kind of looked at him and I was like, sounds like a great plan to me. I was like, what's stopping you from doing that? And all of a sudden you just see the light bulb, that confidence, right? That discomfort of like, man, he's like, I don't know. Like I was like, he's like, I think I'm going to do that. I was like, I think that's a great idea. And this time it only took him 2 days. So then 2 days later, he comes walking through the door like this, arms wide out, big smile. He's like, guess what? And I go, I have a feeling I know what you're going to tell me, but I want you to say it. What happened? He's like, I'm done. I'm caught up. Those two F's, I have C's now. And I'm like, dude, congratulations. You had a plan, you executed. Now here's what I'll tell you before the naysayers are like, you didn't even punish him. Back in my day, I would have had this taken away, that taken away. I would have been punished. I would have been spanked, yelled at. And I'm like, I didn't need to do that. In fact, there were consequences. He had to get up early. He had to stay up late. And here was the real thing. Because I asked him details like, what was it like going and getting your lunch and telling your buddies you ain't sitting with them? He's like, it sucked. Being in that auditorium all by myself, that was horrible. So there were consequences, but there were natural consequences. Like he's in his 20s and 30s. Dad's not going to be there to inflict like punishments or grounding or something. Like you got to figure this out, right? That's what an adult does. An adult experiences natural consequences of their decisions and fixing the problem, which he did. So that built his self-esteem tremendously. But it would have been so much easier for me to be like, all right, here's the plan and here's what we're doing. Don't worry about it. We'll get through it together. But instead, he had to do that.
I'm a big fan of natural consequences. I mean,
Yeah.
you dug the hole. I'm not gonna fill it in. I'm not gonna. You dug the hole, so this is your deal now. I was talking to probably a 19 or 20-year-old the other day. Do you know they didn't even know how to change the bag in their trash can? True story.
What?
True story. So, my thought is, that out serving, we got to be really careful as parents because in our over serving, as an example, we can ruin the kids, right? And so, like with
100%.
our children, for example, we said, okay, when our kids got old enough to talk, we said, okay, well, there's a rent due in this household that you have to pay. And so we had three boys. So we had trash and toilets, pets and poop, dishes and something else. And so every day before school they did it, and we rotated every week. And we try to teach them, hey, because that's not anything to do with natural consequences, but that's about, hey, you have a responsibility
Yeah.
because someday you're going to have greater responsibilities than pooping pets. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's okay for our kids. If I could say anything to parents right now, I'd say, Dad, let your kids struggle, let them battle, let them suffer, get them involved in extracurricular activities, have them do something to challenge themselves so they can later on have the confidence to say, man, I've been here. I've been here before. We had a situation in October, Larry, where we were struggling financially with the organization. And I've got 7 people on the payroll, and they were freaking out. And I'm like, hey, I've been here before. We've been here before. Not a big deal. Then a month later, we were better than we've ever been. But just being able to have that confidence and knowing I've been here, I've struggled through it, and I can get there again, which is really good, man. So
Yeah.
no, I appreciate that. So you had a really cool section in your book that I really appreciate. As we navigate with our children through suffering, through pain, through discomfort, we're doing that to get them on the other end, right? So how do you help navigate children into their adult years, and what have you learned? Because you shared some things about education that you've learned and purpose that you've learned and that you're trying to kind of change that narrative a little with your kids. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. I just want to make sure I'm answering the question the best way I can. Can you just give me a little bit more
Yeah, so
detail
well
of,
yeah, so
yeah.
you wrote in your book, growing up under the constant message of education, good grades, prestigious college, high paying job, doctor or lawyer equals happiness. And you had said you bought into that, but recently you've been changing that with your children to focus more on, instead of education, focus more on what they're called to do or gifted to do for their future careers.
Yeah. So, you know, I'll be honest. Um, I truly struggle with the public education system,
Oh,
right?
I have a massive issue with the big
Hmm.
business called colleges because our
Yeah.
kids are coming out in debt. they're coming out with a more deconstructed moral compass, and they're coming out with a job no better than their high school graduate friends. So I think that this is something that we as parents need to navigate with our children through.
I agree. And right, wrong, or indifferent, I have two kids that have straight A's and one that is an average student, and the other one's an average student. And to be honest, in this house, the expectation is you have a C or better in your classes. Um, I have friends of mine that they require their children. There's nothing less than a 4.0, period. Oh yeah, period. One of my so my 16-year-old's girlfriends, uh, 4.0. Yep, straight A's in this house, period. Now, here's what I tell my kids, and I think that this is important. Um, I tell them, school is less about necessarily the education that you will get there. Like you're going to use math, right? You have to learn proper grammar. It's good to really learn. It's good to learn how to write. You're going to be writing emails. Punctuation is key. Being able. I was like, but here's what school does teach you, and you have to get through hard things. Do think like so. For instance, I have my oldest right now, same kid. He is just so frustrated with his algebra class. He's like, Dad, he's like, I do not want to do this. This is not important. This is not useful. Like, I will never use this. Why am I learning this and not about taxes? And I'm like, I'll teach you about taxes. Leave that to you and I. Right. I was like, however, look at the theme here, right? Will you ever use algebra? Maybe if you get into engineering or you do something like that, you might use it. I was like, but if you're not going to that field, you probably won't. I was like, however, and he's like, yeah, but I want to own a business. I want to own a gym. I was like, I get that. Do you think if you own a gym that there's going to be things being a gym owner, are you going to love doing everything? Everything. Like everything about that business, are you going to love it? He's like, no. I was like, do you have like a deep passion for marketing? He's like, actually, I do. I was like, what about a deep passion for bookkeeping and your P&Ls and your expenses and revenue and all that? He's like, I don't really like that. I was like, well, it's important, has to be done, right? I was like, the things you are learning in school are getting through things that are difficult that you quite frankly, you have to do it. I was like, if you had the easy road of like, I only want to do the things I want to do, that's not really teaching you a ton. I was like, once you're a gym owner, you can dissect those things. And these are the conversations we have about in entrepreneurship and business owning. I was like, you can you can decide, is this something I want to do or is this something I can delegate? Right? So I tell them there's a big difference between school and life education, right? So um and here's where I think the biggest theme that maybe your listeners will gain from this. My kids, like if they get an F on the test, right? Or one of them is like, I'm not reading to the level I need to. I'm like, I think the average high school graduate reads at a sixth grade level, which is pretty unfortunate. But at the same time, these measurements of how quote unquote smart you are or how worth it you are or how valuable you are, no one that you go, if you decide to go get a job is going to ask you, how did you do your junior year of algebra? They're not. I was like, the piece of paper that you get from a high school degree is I started something, it wasn't the easiest, but I finished it. Same thing with college. I started something, it wasn't the easiest, but I finished it. Like these are all I truly believe, yes, is education important, but the work it takes is more the rite of passage of like, can I do the work? Can I start something? Can I finish it? Can I execute? Can I perform? Can I do difficult things and still come out ahead, right? I mean, that's why I think the difference is there. So in our house, I'll wrap this up with this. How smart you are has very little to do with your grades. I actually think, I actually there's a I don't really I don't want my kids to have Fs, don't get me wrong. But if they fail a test, what's more important to me is like, what'd you learn? Like, especially like this one, if you had to prepare for that test all over again, what would you do different? And they'll be like, oh, I would have done this, I would have done that, I would have studied a little bit more, I would have studied chapter 5 because it was really in there. And yeah, that's what I would have done. And then just forecasting, well, when's your next test? It's next Friday. Well, great. Well, based on what you've learned, how are you going to prepare for that versus this? Because an F is not final, right? Failure is not final. It's only when you give up. If you can take a learning from each one of those things and implement it into your next strategy or next execution, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's good, man. You know, all of my kids graduated from college. But if I were to do it over again,
Yeah.
I would have pointed them in a different direction, not away from college, but towards their gifts, their passions, you know, their purpose in life. Find that path, and then the rest will follow. Some may end up in college, some may end up in a trade school, some may end up just jumping right into the world. I don't know. But I think that that narrative as a parent to raise our children thinking, hey, if you don't go to college, you're a loser. You know, which was kind of the mentality I grew up with when I was in high school. If you don't go to
Same. Me
college, you're a
too.
loser. And I realized, man, that was a lie. It is not true. And as parents, that's a lie that the world will tell us. The truth is, who are you in Christ? Why did he put you here? And what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
You know, so hey, I really appreciate this book, man. This is the Spirit of Fathering, and you said the book is not out. When does the book come out? Father's Day, you said?
Yeah. So Spirit of Fatherhood, it comes out May 28th is pre-orders. And then Father's Day is official launch, which I think it might be the Tuesday or it might be the week right before Fatherhood or Father's Day.
Okay.
But that's when it comes out.
So how do these guys? Where can they go to pre-order a copy of this book?
I believe on Amazon.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
then and then on I believe bookstores as well, like Barnes and Noble, they'll be carrying it. I know our publisher is handling like all the major distribution, but I mean, I think probably Amazon is probably going to be your best bet.
All right. And then how do these guys get a hold of the Dad.Edge and get a hold of the Dad.Edge Alliance? How do they reach you?
Just go to the Dad.Edge.com. I've got all kinds of resources there for you. Got free resources on marriage, patience, parenting. I've got this really great training in PDF. Men love it. It's called 25 Intimate Conversation Starters. You know, you can go have some fun with that with your wife as far as like good date night questions, just getting to know each other all over again. Podcast is downloaded. You can download podcasts literally anywhere and everywhere you download podcasts. I can't even keep up with all these distributors of podcasts.
Tell me about
I just
it.
know we're on all the major
Yep.
challenges and our channels, and I know that people are downloading it on other channels I don't even know about, but I know it's out there anywhere you download podcasts. And then on Instagram at the Dad.Edge, Facebook at the Dad.Edge, YouTube at the Dad.Edge. Everything's the Dad.Edge. If you Google me, everything will come right up.
Awesome. Well, hey, Larry, it's always great having you on the show, man. And I will call you next time I'm in St. Louis, man. So
Please.
Thanks for coming on. And I appreciate your book. I had a great time reading it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you back.
Have a great day. Man, if you enjoyed today's episode and you're not yet a subscriber to our show, please go subscribe to this podcast. That would help us so much to reach more men and make a difference in their life. Until next time, feel the wet sand on the arena floor, hear the deafening roar of the crowd, taste the sweetness of victory, smell the stench of battle, get in the game, get dirty, grind it out, and be a man.